Welcome to Lived Perspective by Autism SA, adjustments I wish my teachers had used in school. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to the elders past and present. I extend my respect to the Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are present today. I would like to introduce my daughter, Phoebe Dryden, who is recently diagnosed as autistic and is currently studying law. And my name is Lexie Dryden. I am Phoebe, Tegan and Jay's mother, and I'm a consultant at Autism SA. So I pretty much have always known that Phoebe was potentially on the autism spectrum, and her intelligence and ability to mask around others at school and outside of home tended to cover this, meaning that I felt she may not meet the criteria. She's always been a bright, happy, bubbly girl who went from loving school to hating school when others did not choose to get to know and understand her or her needs, to loving school and doing well when teachers actually took the time to see who she was behind any behaviours of concern. Some of the main concerns were about her being too social, talking too much and not focused enough, being poorly organised, struggling to start tasks and then wanting to complete them when it was time to move on to something else. She often struggled in starting tasks and being organised enough to be able to do so, and often would then talk to her peers and was labelled as disruptive and disorganised. She hated losing, games, etc., not being first, and was also very perfectionistic, wanting her work to look good. Meaning, again, that she took too long to complete work. In 2011, we tried to look at things that might support Phoebe to get assistance and her needs met, and an understanding from teachers of what her concerns actually were, without getting a formal diagnosis at that point. So this was a graph that we developed to go over some of the issues, potential reasons they may be occurring, and some possible solutions that we could try to work with the teacher around. We did try to introduce positive behaviour support strategies with the school over a couple of years as things were going pretty pear-shaped, but we were told by teachers that we could do that at home if we chose and that they would teach the way that they had always taught. This was really challenging because Phoebe was labelled as a naughty student. At the start of Year 7, her teacher told me that she was labelled by other teachers as a problem child, and my heart sank. At that point, that teacher said he had chosen to ignore all of that, and my heart lifted. He was very structured, firm but fair, and he got to know her behind the behaviours of concern, meaning by the end of that year, she had blossomed into a student who was loving school and academically inclined. She actually came first across the school results in that plan and won the Academic Achievement Award for her class. I am super proud of the person that Phoebe has become, and must say the same also for my other two children. They are all caring, compassionate souls. I've always tried to use the strategies and language at home that I would use at work, and have, in the next few slides, incorporated the visuals that we used at home that were effective and are still effective today in supporting Phoebe. I just wish that her voice could have been heard a whole lot earlier. She wasn't diagnosed as autistic until recently, but she presented as such her whole life. And if people could look at that, look beyond behaviours of concern to see the person who she was, she might have blossomed far sooner. We always use visual strategies and rewards to try and teach Phoebe the skills she needed to be successful in life. The first one on the left is a very early one, which I would not recommend using now because it's talking about no bossy, cranky, whingy voice, where we would talk about the replacement behaviour now. This evolved with time into the second reward chart, where any time she was caught doing something good, she would get a token on that chart. And it was differentially rewarded, so that sometimes she might get a reward, sometimes she might just get a hug, and sometimes she might not get anything. But at the end, when all the tokens were on the chart, she got a big token, big reward from her treasure chest. With time and as Phoebe matured, we were able to evolve these charts to try and teach her more independence. And they evolved to have the chores she needed to do independently. And if she did all of those, she would get 50 cents per day, plus a bonus if she did them all without being prompted. Again, as Phoebe became more mature, we were able to change the reward charts to being a tick chart where she could mark off what she had done independently and would still receive that reward at the end of the day or week. According to my daughter, who is now studying law, this is not legally binding. However, we did reach an agreement to create a contract where we all signed it, and she was able to get virtual money and tokens that she could post every day, which would lead to her getting actual money as a trade at the end of the week. She would get bonuses for if she did all of those tasks independently. The icons on the left were Velcroed and laminated so that they could be changed in the order that we needed for the day or the morning, the afternoon, and she could peel and post them so we could also see what she had undertaken. Finally, we were able to minimise all of that and create individual chore charts for bigger tasks, breaking down complex instructions to reduce verbal input and increase independence, so that instead of me having to prompt Phoebe and my other children every step of the way in teaching them how to undertake a task, we had these visual chore charts that they could follow independently. These included things like cleaning the toilet, cleaning the bathroom, sweeping, mopping, to support them in independent living when they were older as well. These are still in use today in some extent, where we still have a chore chart that I photograph and text to her in regards to keeping track and looking after animals and where we are going to be on each day. This has helped Phoebe to become the independent learner that she is today. I would like to introduce Phoebe now with her story.
Hi, my name's Phoebe. I'm 21 and studying law at the moment. I'm in my 4th year, so almost done. And I was recently diagnosed with autism at 21 years of age.
So, Phoebe, with your mum working in the field, why was it you were so late being diagnosed?
Well, I think at the time, because it was quite a few years ago now, a lot of the teachers weren't really educated on autism. And if they were, it was really only to do with the male presentation. So they couldn't really pick up on a lot of the behaviours that I was presenting with because they didn't actually connect the two, that they were actually related. And so because I came across as a little bit too neurotypical in a way, because I could make eye contact, it felt like pulling teeth, but I could do it, and I could socialise and hold a really good conversation. They didn't identify me as someone in need of help, and so when I had similar sort of behaviour to male peers, they just thought that I was naughty, but that they were in need of extra help. It was actually my Year 12 research project that got me thinking about getting a diagnosis. I did it on evidence-based practices and how they can impact students when applied in a primary school setting. And when I was doing that, I was looking at the sort of hallmark behaviours that may signify that somebody is on the spectrum. And I started applying some of them to myself and thinking, actually, a few of these sound quite familiar. And so I started to look into it further and eventually decided I should. And in the end, I got my diagnosis so that I could make peace with myself and understand that I was never who I was made out to be by my teachers. I wasn't a naughty child or a bad person. I was just somebody who really needed help.
So, Phoebe, how do you feel your later diagnosis impacted upon you?
I think it really impacted on the way in which I saw myself for many years. For a really long time, a lot of my teachers had labelled me as a bad student and would discuss me in the staff room, so a lot of other teachers had that opinion of me too, and I feel like eventually that kind of imprinted on the way I saw myself. I was really regularly told off in front of my classmates, but now some of those same teachers will come in and see me at work and tell me that they just can't believe I'm doing so well, as if it seemed impossible when they knew me. And the way they would talk to my parents about my issues was in more saying I was a bad child than identifying that maybe I needed some extra help. And when we did suggest that, maybe some things should be changed to accommodate for me, they just outright refused. And it was just eventually really frustrating, and it made me hate school, made me want to give up on studies in general, until I eventually got a good teacher who took the time to get to know me and understand my needs. And he put a lot of strategies in place that I really benefited from. And I had gone so long trying to work 10 times harder than my peers to get the same result that they did. But after those, those little practices were applied, I ended up doing a little bit better. And I was really proud of that, because I never thought that I could get there, but I did.
So, Phoebe, with what happened in primary school and then into high school, what did work, or what do you think could have worked better?
So I think the key thing was that I never felt as though I was listened to until I got up to year 7. And a lot of my concerns were never addressed or even considered by a lot of teachers. The year 7 teacher was the one that really made a great positive impact on me, because he did take the time to listen. And as soon as he had listened, he understood my problems. He gave me clear routines, schedules, and set times for me to start and finish tasks, but allocated enough time that I would be able to achieve that. And if I did slip and have any of my sort of more unfavourable behaviours rear their head, he would take me aside and talk to me like a person and ask what it was that was maybe bringing them up had I had a bad day. And I think understanding your students is really important, and knowing that kind of external factors may have impacted the way they're acting in your classroom. And I also appreciate that he was really firm but fair with all of the kids. So it was never just me being yelled at in front of everyone. Nobody got yelled at, everyone was listened to. And so when you did get in trouble, you knew why, and you understood that it was on you and it wasn't just a behavioural issue you had no control over. Then in my later years, when I was in high school, while my behaviour had drastically improved because I had learnt a lot of supports for myself that I could use, there were a couple of things that made it just a little bit more difficult for me to study than maybe some of the other students there. Some of my classes, the teachers were really against using headphones and listening to music when we were just having quiet study time in class. And I have tinnitus, which is a ringing of the ears, and I just genuinely couldn't focus in silence because it would act up and be really loud and take up all of my attention. And so for me, having something to listen to or particularly watch while studying was a lot more beneficial. And so I did have a few teachers who I discussed that with, that actually did let me watch movies or listen to music in class, because they understood that that was what I needed to focus. But it is also important to understand this isn't a one-size-fits-all approach, and what may have worked for me might not work for everyone. It definitely didn't work for some of my peers who, they tried to do the same thing and they just got distracted. Another major issue that I had in high school was to do with a Year 9 English assignment that required us to interpret the underlying meaning of a poem. And the poem that I got was really difficult and included the line, "My thumb is an onion." And being on the spectrum, I couldn't help but take it literally. And all I could get was this image of an onion thumb in my head, and I couldn't get it out, and I couldn't figure out for the life of me how that could mean anything but my thumb is an onion. And I tried to explain that to my teacher, and he just kept saying, well, what do you think that means? And I couldn't grasp it and felt like I wasn't being understood in what I was trying to ask. And I think assignments like this can be really difficult for people on the spectrum, because sometimes reading between the lines like that isn't something that comes naturally to them or that comes at all. And it was really trying for me, because as a perfectionist, I couldn't comprehend how I couldn't understand, and I blamed myself for a long time for not being able to grasp that concept. So I think that perhaps it's important to consider that certain tasks may be really difficult for people on the spectrum that may come really naturally and easily to other students.
So Phoebe, with all of those issues you faced in school, what is the message or messages you want to get across to those teachers now?
One of the main messages that I want to get across is that it's important for teachers to educate themselves on autism spectrum disorder and the way in which it presents in both boys and girls, because I feel as though so often girls are left out of that equation. I think this problem stems from the fact that the presentation of autism that a lot of people are familiar with is the stereotypical male presentation that is shown a lot in the media, sort of like the I Am Sam and Rain Man. But that is not how autism always presents, and it's a really diverse spectrum. That's why they call it that. So it's important to remember that there are a lot of different behaviours that can indicate that someone is on the spectrum. But whether a student is or isn't on the spectrum, a lot of the strategies can be used for all students and be really beneficial to help them reach their full potential. It's also important to understand that a lot of people on the spectrum, particularly females, mask their characteristics when at school or in public to hide the fact that they are experiencing issues. I know I did for a long time. It took a lot out of me to be at school, look people in the eye, make small talk with my friends that I didn't really like to do. And I would act completely normal at school and get home and just lose it, because it would be so tiring and draining to basically lie for the whole day. And that is why it's so important to listen to parents and students when they discuss the child's issues, because sometimes you don't see it at school, but it is still very much there.
So in your opinion, what can teachers and support staff do to support kids with autism?
I think it's necessary to get to know the individual and find out what works for them and what doesn't, and to understand the identifiable behaviours, and try to hone in on those and provide strategies to help the individual learn how to self-manage said behaviours. In my case, I really struggled, like I've said before, with the fact that I came across as very neurotypical. I was very social and got good grades. So they struggled to believe that I would be autistic or have any underlying issues that were resulting in my behaviours of concern. So I think it's really important that teachers understand that on the surface level, some students may come across as neurotypical, but that doesn't mean that they are. And that's why it is important to implement strategies classroom-wide, because you just sometimes don't know, and so it's better to have it there and not need it than need it and not have it. Autism can be isolating enough on its own, because it feels like everyone knows how to do all these little things that you can never quite grasp or understand, especially if not fitting in results in the child already being isolated by their peers. It sets a precedent that the child should be alone to the other kids.
What kind of things from your experience do you think that education providers should avoid?
I firmly believe that there is no real benefit from isolating a child for behaviours of concern and putting them in buddy class or seeking them away from other children, because all it does is isolate them, and a lot of times that can just exacerbate the behaviours of concern. It did for me when I would disrupt class or talk to other students, I would be sat at the back, and that would make it worse for me because then I would try to find extra ways to talk to my friends or make faces at them. And it just makes the child feel bad, and there's no real benefit that can come from that in the first place. I also think that people should really avoid labelling a child as a problem child or as naughty or rude, because it can definitely stick. When I was a child, it was said to my face that I was a problem child and a bad kid, and I've never forgotten that, and I don't think I ever will. And that's because teachers are extremely influential, so what they say to their students can often stick. I also think that punishment for poor social skills or organisation is really unfair. You wouldn't judge a fish for not being able to climb a tree. Social skills don't always come naturally to people on the spectrum, and sometimes even if you give them all the right strategies, they might not come at all, and that's okay. In situations like that, it's important to celebrate individual successes rather than setting a broad standard for everyone. Back in 2011, I was 11 years old, and a lot of the strategies that I have now, I didn't have available to me then. So I had a lot of small individual behaviours of concern that added up to a really big problem for me as a person, because I could tell that I was different from my classmates. I could tell that my teachers were growing sick of certain behaviours of mine, and I didn't understand what I could do to change that. And luckily I have a mum who works for Autism SA as a consultant, so she did provide strategies for me at home, but I was in dire need of having them applied at school, and unfortunately it wasn't until my last year of primary school that that did happen. However, in making this chart with my mum, I was able to express the concerns I had and have a voice and explain what I needed. And that was a real starting point for me in learning to advocate for myself as a student. And I got a lot better at it as I got older, as many people on the spectrum will.
So Phoebe, what do you think can be applied for all students rather than just those with an official diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder?
I think that even if someone isn't diagnosed as autistic, many of the practices that are useful for people on the spectrum still work for people who aren't. A lot of them help teach management skills and communication skills that are expected of adults, and how else are students supposed to learn them unless you educate them on the topic? It's also very helpful to set individual standards that are based on the ability of each student, rather than setting a classroom-wide standard that perhaps some students won't be able to reach, because not everybody's best is the same, and small successes are really important. Celebrating them can give a student a good kick to keep them going and working towards improving, and sometimes without that positive reinforcement they can fall back on worse behaviours. But with evidence-based strategies in place, kids can, get a good education, and they can become the best versions of themselves, and not just that, but the best they are capable of. The final message that I really want to get across is that you should listen to the kids and their parents and educate yourselves as much as you can, because knowledge isn't just power, it's positive progress.